So today as a group, we will be firstly discussing the history of the harpoon and what it is. Well, a harpoon is a long, spear-like instrument used in fishing, whaling, sealing, and other marine hunting activities to catch large fish or marine mammals. The word originally came about through the Basques people, who are an indigenous ethnic group derived the word arpui, meaning to fasten or to hold, which later came to harpoon in Spanish and harpoon or harping iron in English. The earliest known harpoons were made and used 90,000 years ago, and most likely to spear catfish. Two of the first known civilizations that we are aware about are in both Japan and India, that they used harpoons in their early centuries. Firstly, in Japan, during the Paleolithic times, which was about 20,000 years ago, became very widespread in the Saltarian and Mongolian periods through trade and fishing expeditions. And secondly, in the early hunters of India, the Mykonpi people that used harpoons with long spears to hunt catfish in their local rivers. And more recently discovered are in the Consker caves in southern France that contain cave artwork from over 16,000 years ago, including drawings of seals which appear to have been harpooned, and this truly is our first depiction of what harpoons really look like at the time. And not only do they appear in caves, but they also appear in ancient literature, most importantly in the Bible in the story of Job, chapter 41, verse 7. Canst thou fill his skin with barbed irons or his head with fish spears? And at this point in the story, God is putting Job in a situation with an unkillable beast, showing him that some things are truly out of man's control and that man cannot kill this beast. And as a group, we believe that this does have some correlation to the story we are discussing. So secondly, today as a group, we will be discussing the history of harpoons as they specifically pertain to whaling. As I previously mentioned, where the word originally derived, the Basques people were among the earliest whalers, dating back to 900 AD. Humans have engaged in whaling since prehistoric times, including in Korea, at the Neolithic Bane site, which may date back to 6000 BC, where numerous whaling bones have been found on the shore, with blades spread throughout its remains. One of the first whaling expeditions on record by the use of harpoons is from 1570, at Morosky, a bay attached to the Isle of Bay in Japan. Because of the great success that came through the use of harpoons from this expedition, the harpooning method later spread through provinces in Japan as a growing industry that commanded the whaling industry over a 70-year time period. As whaling became more popular, these four provinces began to modify old harpoons, changing the whaling industry forever. During the whaling seasons that included winter and spring, one technique they used was having their harpoon boats wait offshore for a signal from spotters on cliffs. These spotters would signal with flags and smoke, indicating species, number, and position of whales as they approached. Once receiving its signal, harpoon boats flew into action, throwing harpoons, and then lances that followed. When a whale became weak, a harpooner swam into the water to tie ropes through holes made near the blowholes in the back of the body to prevent the carcass from sinking. Another location where the industry started to become relevant was in 1610 in Spitzenberg, Norway, that was encouraged by reports of whales off of their coast. At the time, the English Muscovy Company sent a whaling expedition there the following year. The expedition was a disaster, with both ships resulting in being lost, but they did stay persistent. As other countries followed in suit, with Amsterdam and San Sebastian each sending a ship north, with ships returning to Spain with a full cargo of oil. This fabulous return resulted in a fleet of whale ships being sent to Spitzenberg in 1613, and this ultimately kickstarting this booming industry that would last for over 100 years. Thirdly, today as a group, we will be discussing the three different types of harpoons that were used in the whaling industry. Firstly, the two-flue harpoon, or the two-flue iron, which was commonly known in the whaling industry for over 1,000 years, and appeared in artworks dating back to the 14th century. The one problem with this harpoon was that it tended to penetrate no deeper than the soft outer layer of the blubber, often making it possible for the whale to escape by struggling or swimming away forcefully enough to pull the shyly embedded barb out backwards. This problem was later solved by the creation of the one-flue harpoon used in the whaling industry after it was introduced in the early 19th century when it replaced the two-flue harpoon. By removing one of the flues, the head of the harpoon was narrowed, making it easier for it to penetrate deep enough to hold fast. making it less likely to cut its way out of the whale's meat and blubber, was therefore more successful in whaling. Later on into the mid-19th century, the toggling harpoon was adapted by the inventor Lewis Temple using iron. He modeled a design after an iron version of the ancient design used in the Arctic by the native whale hunters there. The Temple toggle was widely used and quickly came to phase out the use of the common harpoon and dominate the whaling industry. As I previously mentioned, the 3 different whale harpoons that were used, this is a visual to show what they actually looked like. The harpoon, or as it was commonly called by whalemen, the iron, was meant only to fasten to the whale and act as a hook to fasten the whale to the whale boat. It was not normally meant to kill the whale, except for some experimental designs. Killing was done by the lance, because the harpoon was the single item that determined the success or failure of a whaling voyage, and in fact, the whaling industry. It was the central item in the study of improvement. The 3rd harpoon on my screen is the Temple toggle harpoon, which is most likely the harpoon used on the Pequod in 1840. At the time, located in New Bedford, where Queequeg and Ishmael originally met, was where Lewis Temple originally worked on his creation, and at the time was the whaling capital of the world, due to its great success during the period of 1830 to 1850. While the African-American blacksmith and former slave Lewis Temple did not invent the original harpoon toggle, his invention made it better. The first barb at the tip of the toggle iron was designed to penetrate the whale's flesh. The second barb also went straight in. A small wooden peg holding the lower barb in place would then break when the whale pulled away, allowing the barbed head to swivel away from the shaft. This new T-shape of the barb prevented the dart from pulling out of its wound.
Now onto the harpoon cannon. The harpoon cannon, not to be mistaken with the harpoon gun, was invented in the late 19th century by Svend Foyn. It is placed at the head of the ship for stability purposes. Onto the components. There is a steel swivel cannon head, which can be seen at the top of the picture, an explosive steel head with 500 grams of black powder, which is on the tip of the harpoon. The swivel steel cannon has improved accuracy over the counterpart, which is a harpoon gun. This gun was a flintlock pistol with a harpoon for a bullet. The harpoon cannon is much safer than harpooning by hand, but still possesses the risk of the ship capsizing.
Whale lines were the ropes attached to the end of harpoons. Typically, whale lines were 2 inches in circumference of loose-laid ropes, commonly made of 3 strands of especially strong and pliable materials. Whale lines were made of Russian hemp up until the early 1830s. That's when manila was first imported into the United States. Manila was stronger than Russian hemp, but not quite as durable. Whale lines were coiled and stored in the stern of boats and tubs. Large tubs contained 225 fathoms, and small tubs contained 75 fathoms. 1 fathom is equal to 6 feet.
The Pequod's harpooner's introduction. Queequeg. Captain Peleg was asking questions about Queequeg when he appeared out of nowhere and grabbed a harpoon. He saw a spot of tar in the water and aimed. Queequeg compared the spot of tar to a whale. He then proceeded to throw the harpoon over the side of Bildad and hit the spot of tar dead center. This caused Peleg to immediately want him due to his immense amount of skill and power. Tashtego. Tashtego is a Native American. During the introduction to him, Ishmael makes the assumption that Tashtego has the characteristics of a warrior with a hunter's spirit. Tashtego left the fields where he previously hunted to instead hunt whales and everything else they came into contact with. Dagu. Dagu is an African tribesman. Although he is on the Pequod, he is not accustomed to what many of the whalers do. He still praises his tribe's gods. He started his harpooning adventure when a whaling ship stopped at a port in Africa. Dagu is also a very tall man, making his partner, Flask, look even smaller than he already is.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk about quotes from the story that relate to harpoons. The first quote, chapter 81, page 241, quote, "In most land animals, there are certain valves or floodgates in many of their veins, whereby when wounded, the blood is in some degree at least instantly shut off in certain directions. Not so with the whale, one of whose peculiarities is to have an entire non-valvular structure of the blood vessels, so that when pierced even by so small a point as a harpoon, a deadly drain is at once begun upon his whole arterial system." And when this is heightened by the extraordinary pressure of water at a great distance below the surface, his life might be said to pour from him in incessant streams. I found this quote very interesting and pertains great to harpoons. So this quote is talking about how most animals, when struck, their blood valves clot, and this helps slow down the bleeding. The issue for whales is that their bodies, when struck by harpoons, there isn't any valves to clot to stop and slow the bleeding. Also, the pressure of the water acts like a catalyst and quickens the rate of blood loss. That is why such a small puncture by a harpoon can take down one of the greatest mammals to ever live. That one small puncture, as the quote says, his life might be said to pour from him in incessant streams. This quote also from chapter 81, page 242. It so chanced that almost upon first cutting into him with the spade, the entire length of a corroded harpoon was found embedded in his flesh, on the lower part of the bunch before described. But as the stumps of the harpoons are frequently found in the dead bodies of captured whales, with the flesh perfectly healed around them, and no prominence of any kind to denote their place. But still more curious was the fact of a lance head of stone being found in him. This quote is talking about when the Pequod was chasing the old whale from the German whaling ship, and the Pequod won the race and killed the old whale. When Starbuck and his men were cutting into the carcass of the whale, they spotted an old lance head made of stone. Starbuck and the crew were very curious about finding such an old harpoon in this whale. They think the harpoon was used by Northwest Indians long before America was discovered. This is very interesting because this very much happens in real life. The next slide talks about a recent finding of a century-old harpoon found in a whale.
In 2007, a 50-ton whale was caught off the coast of Alaska with an old whaling harpoon still stuck in its neck. The harpoon was embedded deep in the blubber of the whale. The harpoon fragment was believed to be between 115 and 130 years old. The fragment was believed to be fired from a heavy shoulder harpoon gun which was patented in 1879. The whale survived about 100 years with this fragment still stuck in its neck. The whale was thought to be 130 years old when it died, and is increasingly rare to find whales over a century old.